All right, we are live. This is Master and Hangout number 3 with Maor APPELBAUM. Maor, tell us what you're working on now or what you've just finished.
I'm currently working on a few projects, band El Nino that I just delivered now the masters, and the band Yes, the prog band, the British prog band Yes. I also just finished, and there's a few jazz projects.
All right, we are live. We are live.
Oh.
Master and Hangout number 3. Okay, whoever has YouTube open, you have to turn your YouTube on.
We're getting feedback.
Currently
That's you, Mayor.
Master and Hangout number 3
just delivering.
Mayor, that's you. Mayor, that's you. You have a YouTube that's open. You have a YouTube page somewhere that's open. Like if you have Safari or some other web page open right now. I just muted you so that it would stop. But you have to close out those YouTube pages or mute them back. Mute them. But that's feedback from you, Mayor. You have a YouTube page open. And then you'll have to unmute yourself, Mayor.
There's an audio problem.
Mayor, that's you. Mayor, you have a YouTube that's open. You have a YouTube page somewhere. Okay, Mayor. Close any web pages that you have open except the Google Plus, because some of your web pages you have a YouTube that's open. It's playing back. It's playing back the YouTube of what we're doing. I had to mute you again so that the feedback would stop.
Sounds like we landed on the moon.
Okay, Mayor, you're muted. But once you have closed out your YouTube pages that have us playing, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Mayor. It's playing back
you
the
hear me
YouTube
now?
of what we're doing.
You guys hear me now?
I had to mute you again so that the feedback would stop.
Now you guys hear me?
Yes, Mayor, but you have to close out your YouTube pages that you have open. You're muted. But once you have closed out your YouTube pages that have the
I don't have any.
Unmute yourself.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Now you've closed them out. Now you're good to go.
No, I was probably getting from a few others at the same time. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Let's try this again.
Okay, let's start again.
Now, when you first said the Yes group, I thought you were talking about Yes from way back in the day. There was a group called Yes. Tell me about this group, Yes. What type of group is this?
It's the same band from back then.
It's the same band? Oh,
yes.
Okay. And what's the name of the album?
It's Heaven and Earth.
Okay, so you've worked on the Yes album. What else have you worked on recently?
Worked on the new El Nino album.
El Nino?
El Nino, yeah, El Nino. It's called Till Death La Familia. Yeah. And
okay.
Few jazz albums and rock albums, some artists that are less known, some independent artists, and singles for a Canadian band called the Conline Crush. They're quite known in Canada, also in America. They have fans. And, let's see, quite a bunch. By the way, picture and sound is good. Do you guys hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, good. What else been working on? Really, some bands from Israel, bands from Canada, bands from Europe, from Brazil, from here, a lot of bands as well. Just to, it's a lot, so it's kind of hard to remember everything. But there's a Mediterranean rock band called Esh. They're from Los Angeles. There's a cool band called Drugstore Fanatics from here as well. I mentioned the Yes album, the El Nino. There's a band now I'm working with called Blackmore, and there's a band. Well, I need to remember now. Thick Shop, and there's another band. There's a lot of. It's a blend of independent bands. Some are up and coming bands. Some are already bands that have released a few albums. Oh, there's a band called The Chimps that I'm doing now as well. So, I did Head PE. That's another kind of metal with reggae and funk. And
what type of music? Most of these are what type of music?
well, actually, it's a mixed bag of a lot of things. I would get rock albums, pop albums, R&B, metal, prog rock albums, punk albums, hardcore albums, some EDM stuff. It's not just albums; could be EPs and singles. Today there's a lot of singles being released, so the market is and tracks for placements. If artist wants to place his music on a TV show, so what they do is they submit it and they make sure it's mastered so it sounds well or better than what they have already, and then they just submit it, and there's more possibilities when it sounds better. And some of it is submissions for finding a publishing deal or a management, or getting a song to an artist, so they want to kind of make it sound almost as it's the final sound. And so they do that in order to kind of help the either producer or manager see the potential in the song. So they make part of it. They don't skimp on that because they feel that that helps get the message through better. So that's kind of what I'm doing. There's no just one genre. It goes on everything.
What's the most difficult thing that you find dealing with the people who are not professional, on the elite status, professional type level?
Well, I think it's not just about if someone is professional or not. It first of all goes to how the person is. You have a non-professional working with you, and it will be really fun to work with. And you can have a professional, it will be not fun at all. I think that it really boils down to personality. Everybody has opinions, and sometimes people don't like hearing what they don't like. Like somebody tells them, "Oh, there's a problem here." They don't like hearing it, but it's not really if you're a professional or not. It's really how you deal with criticism. And just like with me, if I do something and the client doesn't like that, I want to know what he doesn't like, why, and how to achieve what he wants. And sometimes he wants something that is not that great, but you got to live with it. And sometimes he does want something that is better than what you handed him, and by him telling you those things, you can improve it. It's to dance the tango, you need two people, and either way you want to move forward or backward, it has to go with one side pushing and the other accepting. So I don't think being a professional or not being a professional will say, that's the right thing or that's the wrong thing. Or hard to deal with. It's really about accepting. I've worked with bands that are very professional, but at the same time they can still make mistakes. And I worked with people who are not professional, but you can see they're talented, and they're willing to discuss what they want, and in the end you get a better result that way. You have to remember we're dealing with art, and art has a lot of egos involved, and art has, things that we can't quantify. So, did that answer the question?
Yes and no.
No.
Absolute good answer. That was a great answer. A lot of the people saying Pensado students, they have anxieties about how to deal with mastering engineers, and so I was actually trying to get a question in for them, but you gave me like that. That was awesome. What you just said was awesome. But we get a lot of posts where guys have no clue what to do when it comes to dealing with a mastering engineer, how to start, whatever. And I was just wondering, what are common problems that occur with people who are totally new to mastering?
Okay. I'll give you an answer that maybe is funny a bit, but you know, I'm new to Google Hangouts, right? I mean, you can see that I'm a rookie when it comes to Google Hangouts. And just like I just made a mistake with opening YouTube's, you know, this can happen to either the person approaching a mastering engineer, and that can also happen to a well-seasoned mastering engineer. You know, we got to be open for mistakes. You know, you can't expect everything to go, you know, flawless. And if you're open to talk about things and open to feedback on both sides, then that's really what helps. I'll give you an example. A lot of times when people work at home, they don't have the best speaker system to work with. They're not noticing if they have too much low end, or their room cancels some of the low end or even high end, and you'll get a mix with a bunch of high end with no low end, or a bunch of low end with no high end, or the worst, you'll get a bunch of low end and a bunch of high end, and you wouldn't know where to start from. And then, you know, one of the things that can happen is that, you know, you're basically having more high end than you expect, and when you cut the lows, you find out there's even more excessive high end. So one of the things I recommend for, you know, people who work in a home environment is to take the mix out and to listen into as much environments as possible. For example, you know, a car is one of the most famous ones, and it's really because people listen to music in a car. So they're used to that environment. It's kind of, you know, second nature for them to listen to music there. So listen in a car, listen in an iPod, listen in earbuds, headphones, home stereo, computer speakers. Now, don't expect to get the full bass on every system, because some systems won't be able to reproduce that. So don't go telling your mastering engineer, I heard it on my computer and I need more bass. Your computer speakers can only generate a certain amount of low end. So, you know, don't expect to have a lot of low end there. You know, even though if you might reference something else and hear more low end, it could be that the other thing doesn't have much high end or has less presence in the mid-range, and that's why you're hearing more low end. So be aware that when you're referencing different things, it doesn't mean that it's exact what you're having. Especially in dance music, you know, I have a friend who cuts all the highs in his music. Like, there's barely highs there, but it sounds great because he knows how to work that low end and low mids, and it works great in clubs as well. But you can't compare your, like, let's say your track to his track, because it's a different production, it's a different way of mixing. And I think that one of the common mistakes is people reference the wrong thing. If you want to reference your music to someone else, make sure that he exactly sounds like you, because otherwise, if his track has a lot of low end and doesn't have a lot of other elements, you can't have that low end. Because if you have that low end, you won't have the high end that, you know, it's going to be taking. Everything is like, you know, you add something, it takes off something. You take off something, it adds something. You know, it's not a full equilibrium. You know, you got to find the balances, and especially in today's you know, production techniques where you can put so many plugins on the master bus. You know, you find yourself taking this and making it this, but then you raise the level of that, so you assume it's right or it's good, but then you find it's actually thin. but that's sometimes what the label wants or the producer wants, and you got to live with that. So it's kind of hard to say, here's my advice, because it's so complicated. And even for me as a mastering engineer, you know, I can take it to so many directions. It's about accepting it, you know. I can say, hey, let's go down with the level and make it sound full. If the artists accept that, great, we have a big sounding album. If he doesn't accept that and he wants it to be really, you know, thin and compressed and then just leveled up or clipped, then we do that. So really the advice is listen to your music and mixes in a lot of spaces, like different rooms, different speakers. And I think one of the most important thing is don't lose the focus. And it's really easy to lose the focus when you apply so much processing on the mix, because your ear gets used to it and you start liking the compression, you start liking the clipping or the multibanding. So I would say, you know, take breaks, listen to it without it, see if you really dig the volume or how the vocals come out rather than the actual full music. Did that answer it?
Yes. Okay. Let's see. Damon, you had a question for him. Unmute yourself and see if you can stump Maor.
By the way, if I don't answer the question, you can always tell me and I'll continue.
I don't think I'll be able to stump him, but I'll go for it.
We can't hear you good. Could you talk close to the mic?
Can you hear me now?
Not much.
All right.
Yeah, you're low volume, Damon. Go ahead. I'll relay your question if it's a short one. But yeah, you need to get closer to the mic or something.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Just give it a shot.
Okay.
I'll ask him.
All right. Is the mastering environment, the acoustic treatment, as critical as the mixing environment, or is it more critical?
Okay, the question, Maor, is the mastering environment as critical as the mixing or more critical?
Well, I think that some people will say yes, some people will say no, and some people will say maybe. I think that the real answer is you work with what you have. Some mastering engineers have rooms that only they know. And if you walk into that room, you wouldn't understand what you're hearing. But the mastering engineer that works there for a long time knows exactly how the room sounds, so they can make it work. When I built this, when we had this room built, it was important for me that if a client walks in, he hears the sound in a very detailed way, so he can notice if there's problems in the mix itself, and if he likes what I'm doing to it. I've been in so many different rooms throughout my career and just, you know, being with other mastering engineers in their you know, mastering studios, and I gotta be honest with you, I think it's really about how you know your room and gear and the type of aesthetics you want to put into the sound and music. There's rooms that are super treated in a way that you walk in, you know, it's so quiet there, and you can hear every little detail. You can there's rooms that are in between. There's dry rooms, then you have to really crank them loud, and there's you know, rooms that are just, you know, they're unique to their own, and just the mastering engineer knows the room. It's good to have a good room, just like it's good to have a good set of speakers, an amp, and monitor controller. But you know, it's really, it goes down really to what the type of aesthetics and taste and ability of the mastering engineer. Just because we choose to improve our listening and monitoring system, It's just I guess it's a habit of ours. But I've been in places where I wouldn't understand what I'm hearing, but the results there are great. So it's critical, but it's critical to get certain results, but you can get other results that are great without it. Did that answer the question?
Did that answer it for you, Damon? Before I go ahead and type it to the side. Yes. Oh, he says yes. I had Maor. I had asked him to type whatever on the side, and I'm just going to read it off to you real quick.
Sure.
He says, "Is the acoustic treatment in the mastering environment as critical or more critical than the mix environment, and is it tuned? Is the mastering environment tuned?"
In my studio, it's tuned. Yes. Usually, it's a combination of eliminating frequencies that are canceled. It's eliminating the problem areas. Let's say there's a low frequency that is canceled, like standing waves and all that kind of stuff. So usually it's eliminating those cancellations by diffusion or bass absorption or different things like that. If there's a buildup of certain frequencies, that also they will try to arrange it in a way that it doesn't overpower. So I would say it's tuned. Here it's tuned to get the big size of the sound and to avoid cancellations on the low end and on the high end, and early reflections as well. So that's basically what I would look at. You want to have your room dialed as best as you can to compensate for problems, and at the same time, you want to hear it how it's going to be translated outside, but you want to also know it better than how it is outside, because you never know what system is going to play it through. So you're going above what is normal. If that explains it. Oh, let's say this: you want to make sure it translates best everywhere possible. So you design the room to be super accurate, but at the same time, you want to be comfortable for you to work in for hours.
Okay, he says, great, thank you. So you answered it for him. Now, Arpit, I have no idea if I'm saying your name right. If you're able to talk, unmute yourself, go to the top, take the cursor up to the top of the screen and click on the microphone to unmute yourself. If not, there you go. Yep, do it. Click it again. There you go. All right.
First of all, thank you for doing the hangout. I had two questions. What are your thoughts on some of the plugins like Ozone that have preset chains, and how do you use any of that? How do you incorporate it? And also, do you test your masters in mono and stereo? And if you do, what kind of role does that play, and how does that translate to other systems?
Okay, let's start with the plugins. A plugin is a tool. Okay, you can use it and get great results. You can abuse it. Okay, and then the results may change and vary in different ways, from okay to bad, good, horrible, awesome. One thing you have to understand about plugins for mastering: a lot of them apply different processors. So there's a few processors in it, and each one does something else. And it's very easy to turn them all on and mess up, or be lucky and have a good preset or setup. It doesn't replace the ability to make good judgments. You can't just strap a plug and say, okay, they set it on a good preset, it's going to work good for sure. You got to listen to it. You got to be very conscious of what it's doing. I mean, you don't have to understand the actual process, but you do have to listen to it and see that it really does good to your music. And a lot of times the ear gets used to it and you're not noticing what it does. So, you know, don't just put it in, you know, plug and play. You know, listen to it, take it off, put it again, maybe try a different plug and see if the other plug does something better. Go back to that plug, play with the parameters if needed. They're good. They're good tools. You know, you can get great results with them. You know, I think that today plugins are way better than they used to be. The quality and the possibilities are huge, and sometimes you can actually get a really good results with them if you play with them right and if they fit the material. So nothing bad about plugins. You know, they're not hardware because they're not working the same way. You know, there's no electricity running in them. There's no proximity between the gear. There's no cabling or you know, you can't drive them like you drive a piece of gear, an analog gear at least. So it's different, but you can do a lot of things with them. And I would say, you know, when you choose a plug to work with, make sure that you're happy with your mix first, and see what you really need to add to it. And then when you put the plug in, try to figure out what is really needed, because some of them will have reverbs in them and stereo expanders and multiband compressors and enhancers and a lot of functions. And those functions, you know, when they add up, sometimes you could be lucky and get a good result, but sometimes they can just mess up. So be conscious to that and just play with it and see what works best. Some of the presets can be really good, and they might need a small tweak, and some can be like fitting certain mixes and not always your mix. So you know, that's what I recommend. And your second question was?
It was about stereo and mono. So do you monitor your masters in stereo and mono?
Well, I have a system here that I can do mono as well. You know, it's good to have a good mono, especially if you have a really good detailed room. You will hear mono really well, and you could hear where it comes from exactly. Like when I make things mono, like when I check in mono, I have a big mono. You know, I can actually hear really well what's happening there. And then when I open the stereo, it just adds up. So if you can do it, why not? You know, I can't say you have to. The original reason, you know, back in the day with the mono was because people had transistor radios and they had one speaker. Or on TV back in the day was one speaker. So, you know, in broadcasting, either, you know, if, you know, in AM or you know, TV, it was important to check. And now I don't know if you can say it's a necessity today, but you know, if you can, why not, you know, check. It's the, you know, some people I know don't even check on mono and they don't need. And some people I know, they're, you know, every project they check in mono. It's a good way to check your phase. Like sometimes there's like stereo expanders and you put one too far and then you go to mono, it cancels the whole thing. So you can check in mono to see those options. Luckily enough, today most of the devices are stereo, so you run across those issues less and less. But you can check, yeah. It's like, you know, if you can make a good mix in mono and then open it up in stereo, it can sound great. Did that answer? Yeah, okay.
All right, Damon, what's your question? Damon's over here typing something about negative 10 dB. What's your question, Damon? He says, sometimes I come up short of the -10 dB, -6 dB range that some mastering engineers prefer. I understand that you run the risk of raising the noise floor, but with all digital instrumentation samples, does this issue still occur? Do you understand what he's asking?
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually fine with getting peaks in -10. I got some albums that were -12. Some of them were classical. Some of them were cinematic, and they had these dynamics, and they didn't want to even, they didn't want the peaks to reach high, so they really turned it low as much as they could. I think the problem with printing low mixes is not, the resolution. Today I think the resolution is good enough, and the noise floor is quite low. The only problem is you might not hear certain things that happen there if there's noises there. So your monitoring levels will need to be super loud so you can notice it. So I had times where I had mastered a project that was printed super low, and they didn't notice that they had some clicks and pops there that were hard to remove. And I guess they didn't notice that because they weren't listening super loud to it. Or they were printing the mix, like bouncing it. So they were working on the mix, but they didn't print the mix loud. So, while working, they were listening and doing all the, panning and levels and EQs, and everything sounded good to them. And maybe while bouncing it, because they couldn't hear what they're bouncing, it was probably not in real time, or they couldn't hear that there were clicks, and maybe clocking issues that happened, or sometimes a computer, there's a glitch. So that's the risks you get in low volumes, as you might not hear that. But in general, I've got mixes. Even I've done like this technical death metal band, super talented musicians and complex arrangements, and that was around. It wasn't that far from -10, but it sounded great. So yeah, you can go with low level. Just be aware. If you really need to go that level, and if not, you can raise a bit. I say -3 to -6, but that's not. That's not a rule that you have to obey. You can go lower than that. You can go -10, -8, or you can go higher. But then you're kind of risking sometimes. You're not noticing, but you might either clip your converter, or you might be clipping inside the program one of the plugins, or depends on the format you're doing. In 32-bit, you'll have no problem with that, but you still might be able to clip the input converters or output converters. Yeah, I would say -3 to -6, but you want to go further down, -10, fine, -8, -12. As long as there's no issues there.
Maor, are you ever running through a piece of gear, recording back in, and then running through that same piece of gear again? Like if you only have one real expensive tool, but you want to use it twice on a mix?
When you say on a mix, you mean on a master, you mean it as a mastering question, or if it's
yes.
a mixing question? Okay, okay. When I run a mix through a piece of gear, I usually don't double it. Okay, the reason for that is I use a chain, so I'll have an EQ or 2 EQs or compressors, 2 compressors, 2 EQs, whatever combination. Just because that unit has a sound, it doesn't mean I have to apply it twice. If I only had 1 EQ, I don't think I would be doing it. In mixing or recording, that's a different case. I don't do recording or mixing, but I know that in mixing, sometimes you want to use a certain EQ, so you run the track through that EQ, but then you want to use that EQ on a different track, so you'll just make a stem out of it using that EQ and move it to a different track. In my case, I won't be using it a few times. At least I didn't do that till now. Maybe it will. No, I didn't do that till now. But in the past, I've done certain things that it would run a few times. But I think that was due to the certain material that came in and a certain piece of gear that was used. But it's so uncommon for me to run it twice through the same piece of gear, because you're already doing twice the conversion, and you can run to other issues such as too much of that sound. It's like if you record and mix with the same console, you'll have the sound of the console, but if you record with one console and mix on a different console, you can have a blended sound, which is different, and that's what in a lot of cases is done. You record with one preamp and then you mix on a different console that has a different line amp, or you do the same on one piece of gear. You record on one preamp and use the same line amp, but that's more in recording and mixing. I think in mastering it happens less, but I can't say you can't do that. You can do. I've done crazy stuff before. I ran things through different pieces of gear that won't be considered orthodox. Did that answer it?
Yes. Arpit has to go. Arpit Gandhi has to go. So I'm going to ask his question real quick. He says, what is the difference between the new RMS meters that are from companies like Waves, like the Durometer, and I forget the other one that's out? Well, there's several. It says, how does this measure loudness better than the old standards? We'll look forward to it on YouTube. The new meters. He says, thanks again for having me. The NLM Plus.
New meters are more, let's say, connected to the new regulations of loudness. The measurements are different than the normal original measurements. They're used more in order to set the level to meet the criteria of, let's say, the European Broadcasting Union, and also volume regulations here in the United States in terms of post-productions. If you're doing post, it will be more important for you. If you're doing music right now, you can work with them, or you can work with what's out there. You mentioned Durometers. That's one of the industry standard, if you want to call it. I have a Durometer. A lot of other mastering engineers and mixing engineers and recording engineers have Durometers. Some have normal analog view meters. We have peak meters, we have RMS meters, we have loudness meters. Just so you know, every meter is different and reacts different. If you know a meter for a while and you learned how it translates to the outside world, then you know that meter. Every meter has its ballistics, how fast it responds, and what's its resolution. So, I suggest if you're using a new meter that you haven't used before, read about it, talk with people who used it and have experience with it. There's books on metering. It's such a huge subject, and you'd be surprised how much information there is in it. And to make a good meter, it takes a lot of good design, because it's not just numbers moving and LEDs or colors. There's a lot of design put in it in order to make that resolution. So I have a few types of meters. Some I take more in consideration, some I take less in consideration. I would say, the new meters, they're talking about more of the new regulations. So you can look at the numbers and say, oh, this fits, what the specs of this television station gave me, or this broadcasting union gave me. So that's the difference. They're set their numbers look different to meet criterias of what's set by European Broadcasting Union and also here. Did that answer the question?
That did it for me. David Peretz, if you're out there, I've sent you a message on Facebook so that you could join the chat. Let's see, someone had a question for you. Sebastian, you ready? You up for the challenge?
Yeah, hey man, how's everybody doing?
Pretty good. Go ahead and ask Maor. Say hello to Maor and ask him a question.
Hi.
Good. Hey, my question to you was actually from a different perspective. As I don't consider myself a mastering engineer, I'm not really trying to get into things at the moment. So
hold on 1 second, Sebastian. Sebastian, you're very low. We're having to strain to hear you.
Am I?
Yeah. Can you get closer to the mic, or?
Can you hear me now?
Maybe we need to mute all the others so there's less noise.
All right, give it a shot, Sebastian.
How's that?
I guess we got to work with it. Go ahead, ask your question.
I don't know what's causing that. Anyway, how do you prefer to receive mixes? At what levels do you prefer mixes receiving RMS and peak wise?
Okay, well, RMS, I don't have a problem as long as the RMS doesn't look like a peak, if you know what I mean. I've had situations where I got a mix that was RMS minus 4 dB FS, which is louder than a master. But RMS doesn't concern me much as more as the peaks, because one thing I noticed is that the peaks are what usually gets clipped. Where, you know, of course, if you drive your RMS so loud, it's going to get clipped as well. But I like peaks, like we mentioned, between -3, -6, could be -8 or -10 if you want. But -3 to -6 is a good place to be. RMS, I'm not that worried about that unless you're compressing the hell out of it. And then if I get a mix that is RMS -3, then we're working with something super compressed. You know, RMS -18, you know, 50, you know, it's all fine. You know, -18, -15, -14. I usually I prefer judging it based on the peaks. Of course, if I get a square wave, I know that the RMS and the peaks are probably the same or close.
Right.
So I would say, you know, as long as your peaks are not clipping or they have some range, that's fine. But, you know, delivering of a RMS of -18, -20, that's fine with me.
Okay. I just wanted to know what you know. After getting things mastered, you know, you just ask people what they prefer instead of just sending them what you give them. You know what I mean? It's more or less what I want, and more about what's perfect or best for the engineer. You know?
Yes. Well, that's why you develop a relationship with the mastering engineer, and he can always tell you, hey, you know, last time you sent me something, it was too loud. Can you go down a dB or two? And that's priceless, because those things just make you better. You know, the same thing with you know, when I return a project to somebody and he says, hey, you know, I got it this way and that. You know, I learn. You know, we all learn. We have to remember. You know, we're the last in the chain, and there's a lot of responsibility given to us, and sometimes we do our best, but still we need to make improvements to fit the client's needs. So you know, it's a dialogue, you know. So you know, when you're working with a mastering engineer, you know, just talk to him and ask him prior to you sending him a project or after for next time. Sometimes I'll get a project that had certain issues, but I fixed them, and the client would ask me, hey, what do I do for next time to improve? And I'll tell him, look, do the same thing you did. I could deal with I can work with it. Or I'll tell him, next time, lower this and that. Sometimes I don't mind just working with what I have because I can fix it. But in other cases, I would say do this to improve.
Okay. Appreciate that, man.
Okay.
All right. Who has the next question for him? Hey, Constantine. As a matter of fact, Jason, you got a question for him? Or has Jason stepped away? Jason is always working.
Always working, dude. Always working. Not really so much. Actually, my question was the same as the previous question. I just want to know where he likes his really to sit when he gets them from somebody else.
I have an answer that that can help make things easier for everybody. When sending files, don't just send a folder called mixes. Okay, this is something I get a lot of times, and I'm like, guys, you don't understand. For you, it's mixes. For me, I have 20,000 folders called mixes. What do I do with them? I don't know who's who. So, and this can help you guys as well in terms of file management, so files don't get lost. When you're sending out a file or a link, make sure the name of the band is there, so that way we know which project it is. And because you'd probably name it like Song 1 or SG or TR or whatever abbreviation. I would say make a folder with the name of the band, name of the album, and then say mixes. And each song, if you can, write the full name, because later on to figure out what's the name is for us is harder. So just rename the file. And that way we work on it and we know which song and we can write down which song. And another thing, this is funny because this comes from old school. Back in the day, final mixes were called masters, which technically is totally wrong, but they were called masters because here's the masters, take them. Now, it wasn't a problem back in the day because the formats were far from each other. A mix was delivered on a half-inch, quarter-inch, and rarely, but sometimes even on a 1-inch. But they were, sent as a 2-track, unless it was a surround or quadraphonic mix. But they were done in one format. And the person put it out to his system and change it and then he would change it to a different format. Either would cut it on vinyl or on CD. So that was a different format, so you wouldn't mix up. But today everything is in a computer. Your mix file, which you might call it master, is going to be the same name as my master if I call it master. So it's a good idea to just call it final mix instead of master or mastered mix or master whatever. That way, less confusion and less misplacement. I got to a place where sometimes when I get these mixes, I would have to just put my name on it just so they will know that that's not the mix. And I think it's just best to just call it final mix, and then no issues. Some people are used to it. They've been doing it for 20 years. It's going to be hard to change it. But if you can do so, that will make things easier both on you, me, and everybody involved, because you never know where that file is going to go to and get mixed up. I have a friend who released an album, and accidentally, when it went to mastering, to duplication actually, the record label had all the files said master, and one of them was a mix that was called master. And they put that in the album. So you had a full album going like loud, 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 and nice, and then boom, big drop, and boom, come up. Why? Because the mixing engineer called it master. And those mixes came to the label, and they just put them all in one folder. So you can say it's the record label's fault for not noticing or not putting it in the right folder. misplacing it. And you can say also the mixing engineer could have done different, and that way it wouldn't be misplaced. So it's the fault of the record label or duplication or whatever it was, who was doing it. But at the same time, it could have been fixed if it wasn't written that way or named that way. So that's something I had to say. Any questions? Everybody's muted. I guess they can.
Is that it, Constant? Jason, that was it for him?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the only other question is really, do you prefer getting stems or stereo files?
I personally like stereo files. I don't like touching the mix. And in terms of, you know, you worked hard on the mix. Now, things might change in mastering, you know, some. If you want more, let's say the mastering took the vocals down or the vocals were not prominent, you know, leveled enough, then just give me a vocal up version. You know, if the bass was too loud, just give me a, you know, and we find that out after mastering, just give me a bass down. Or if you want a guitar up. I prefer doing that than having stems and then mixing it. And, you know, like, what do I do? What levels he want now, you know? Because you work hard on your mix, you know, even though technically with stems you can process things better because they're not affecting each other, but you worked so hard doing your mix. So I don't want to be your mixer, you know? I want to master it. I want to make sure it sounds good. And if you need changes, we'll do the changes, no problem. Send me a vocal up, vocal down, bass up, bass down, guitar up, guitar down, kick, snare up, whatever you want. We can work it. That's why I don't do stems, and I've done that. Thanks. I've done a bit stems, in the past because people asked me, and then I was like, wait a minute, it's not what I want to do. It's too much guesswork, and if you're a good mixer, you can get a good result. If you're not a good mixer, me doing the stems is not going to help you achieve your mix. It's me mixing it, and I'm not hired to mix. That's not my gig. There's other people who are better qualified for that than me. Anyone? Okay, there's more questions there.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, let me get this one from Harut. One of the Pensidians is asking, is it a good idea to reference your mixes to commercial or mastered tracks? If yes, then what about the difference in loudness and compression?
Well, that question actually answered itself, and that's why you really can't reference for sure. Sometimes I get mixes that were referenced to masters, and then they were super crushed because of that. So, you can do that. The question is why, and does it really help? If it helps you achieve the right high end you want, or low end, be sure you're doing the right thing, because it might take you too far. And then I would say go out and reference in other speaker systems. I think it might be nice to reference just to listen to vibe, maybe, but it might be very tricky, and it might do the opposite of what you want. You might be adding too much highs because the master is bright, or too much lows, or too much of both, and you might be even compressing too much. Some masters are 12 dB louder than mixes. Some are 8, some are 4, some are 2. There's even some mixes that are so loud it's just a difference of 1 or 2 dB barely. I think that if you really want to reference things, try to get the feel of it and not the actual sonics, like full sonics, because what you're referencing is actually a master, not a mix. If you can get a hold of the original mix, that will be the best, because you'll learn so much from it. And then you'll probably know how much to push of what. That's if you can get the original mixes. And sometimes there are online. So I would say, some producers will say go and reference. Some will say no. I say be aware of the consequences of doing it, and if you are aware, be gentle with what you're doing so you're not going overboard. But you know, it's a way of working that works for some people. I've seen people get great results with it, but I think they were very conscious about how much compression there is and how much high end and low end there is. So maybe they were just trying to see where the instruments sit together. But still, they're hearing a master, which will translate better than a mix in most systems. Did that answer the question?
I would say yes. Okay, let's see. Who has not? Charles. You have not asked him a question. You ready for him?
I am not, because I'm actually soaking in a lot of information, and some of the information that has been talked about has been shared. That's what I'm all about. It's like proof in the pudding right now. So right now, it's all about just getting out and networking right now. And learning from other engineers, because I've been in a box for a minute, you know what I mean? So I don't want to overthink anything, make a conversation over something that's so that you guys will already talk about, and I'm like, oh, okay, you already talked about it. You know what I mean? So I'm just listening. Don't count me out.
You mean to tell me you're not finna stump Maor, man?
You said what? You said what?
You're not finna stump Maor with a question. Okay. Well, let's see. Who have we not gotten to? Huh?
I see there's Damon Martin. He has a question. Yeah. Okay. So you want to read the question, or?
So, I know that this is client specific for the most part, but how often do you get mixes that require the least EQ in the mastering process? Also, at that point, are you EQing for taste or out of necessity?
That's a very good question. That's where sometimes there's a big misconception. If a project comes in that needs a really small amount of EQing, it's not that it makes it easier. Sometimes it's harder because even a small amount of EQ can damage it, and it's like you move it a bit and boom, it changed the whole perspective. So projects that come in that need really minimum amount of EQing or compression, sometimes they take longer to figure out what fits best, because like I said, they're more sensitive to changes, because the mix is set really in a nice place and you want to fix a small issue or tailor it in a nice way. That could take longer just to figure out what fits best. Some of those projects are because the mix is really sitting in an almost perfect place, and some of times it's because it's mixed in a sensitive way that certain things can jump up just because you did a small EQ movement. So least EQing sometimes applies to a really good sounding mix, or to a mix that has things positioned in it level-wise and EQ-wise in an area where just a small increment can change big time. So sometimes I do get these projects. I can't say an amount because, like I said, we get a mixed bag. I've done projects where it was just 2 frequencies to figure out. I got projects that were way more. If you look at the big picture, and I said that in other hangouts in the past, you can do small things that make big things, like small changes that make big changes. You can do big changes that make big changes. You can do big changes that do small changes. And you can do small changes that do small changes. Which means in general it's like you can approach in different ways. I've had sessions where I had 9 processors, like EQs, compressors, limiters, all lined up, and everyone was doing just a bit. and that was just to tailor it to sound in a certain way, but it wasn't that extreme. But in the end result, you wouldn't know that it's 9 different pieces of gear doing it, because they're all doing really small things to it. And I had projects where I just put 2, a compressor and EQ, and they made such a big change. Or I had projects that there was 1 piece of gear, you barely heard what I did. And so it's a mixed bag. You get so many things coming in, and it's not just the quality, it's the styling, it's the territory. Some places like certain vocals very upfront and mid-range, harder, edgier, and some places like different. Swedish rock is different than American rock. French pop is different than British pop. So it's different by the style, the territory, the actual recording and mix. So I do get these projects, sometimes more often, sometimes less, depends on that month or week or day. And at that point, if I'm EQing for taste or necessity, that really is determined based on the job. Sometimes I gotta just do a few things just to clear up. And that also, if you look at it, it's also taste, because sometimes fixing a problem, like cleaning up too much, can create a problem, or taking off some excessive low end can boost certain high end and mids out that you don't want to come out. So it's always a taste, but it's also a necessity in some cases. And in the end of the day, it's how the client responds to it. If he thinks you did too much, you got to go back and fix. If he thinks you didn't do enough, you got to go back and fix. So necessity and taste go together. You do it by your taste if it's a necessity, and you do it by necessity to meet your taste. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, let's see. I will take that as a yes. Damon says yes, it did. Ludwig Diaz wants to know, what is your favorite shelving EQ?
A secret. No, just joking. No, shelving. Well, I have a few shelving EQs. There's one here. You probably can't. I'm not sure if you can see this one. This one, that's the Dangerous Back EQ. It's a back sandal EQ, so it doesn't have peaks. It's peak EQs. It only has shelving and cuts, like low cut, low shelving, high cut, high shelving. But I can also do shelving with the Millennia NSEQ4, and I can do shelving with the. This is not a normal API. It's a custom modded API. And I can do shelving with my Weiss digital EQ as well. So, there's a massive passive, and I have a mini massive. So my favorite, it's a good question, because each one sounds different and fits the project differently. So I can't say there's one answer, but each one has a tone to it. The Dangerous has a really nice sound. I like it for shelving. And the custom one that I have with the custom API has a nice shelving as well. Millennia, great shelving as well. I think most EQs I have here, they have a good shelving sound. So it's really program dependent or music related. But it's a good question, because a lot of times that's how we add the the upper range, which makes it sound crystally nice. So, I also have a NTI EQ 3D. I think it was, that has an air band as well. So, I don't use much air band actually, but I did on some albums in the past. There's also exciters and enhancers that make you feel like it's a shelving. It's not a shelving, but they open up the high end in such a way that it sounds open and bright. It's a tough question. What's my favorite one? But Yeah, but I like that dangerous one as well.
What process did you use to choose these EQs? Because I'm wondering why you have the different EQs and what process you went through to choose them. Like you put them through some test. What criteria and what process?
Well, I'll start from the actual mastering side, that the work of it, and then what made me choose. When I work on a project, I audition different pieces of gear. I put them in the chain, take them out of the chain. Put them with another piece of gear, take it out. I try to figure out what works best, because certain gear works great with certain gear. Certain gear doesn't work great with others. So you got to find which ones are friends with the other, or let's say which ones help you get the result you want. So that's why I have different ones. Each one has a different sound. 1K in one of them is not the 1K in the other. They all have a distinct sound and curve and how they're pushed. How much you can push them and how soft they are, how edgy they are. The criteria for me to acquire them was basically what I can get from them. If one is very soft and I need a soft, high, quality EQ, just from listening, saying, oh, okay, this is nice, I like it, then I add it. Same thing with compressors and limiters. I have a bunch of them because each one is different, and I like how they sound on different material. So a lot of it is auditioning, and some of it, since the type of sound that you get from a certain piece of gear, then sometimes you just go, oh, I need that for it. And in a lot of cases you're right, and in some cases you're like, oh, it doesn't fit. And in some cases you know exactly where to go to, and it's every day brings a different scenario, and every project, is different. But you can use one EQ to do everything, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the best on everything. It could sound nice, it could do the job, but maybe a different piece of EQ will just naturally fit. Did that answer the question?
Yes. Chris Stone, did you have a question for him? And also, Peretz is here. David, Mayor, you asked me to bring to link in David Peretz.
Yeah, David.
Yeah, just let me know that he's in.
You can ask a question if you want. Okay, well, hey, yeah, you can ask by chat, and you can ask by audio, because you're invited there if you have the Google Hangouts. So whatever you choose.
We see you off to the side, David. Oh,
okay. Okay, he's asking online. Okay.
How do you get a vibe? David is asking, how do you get a vibe?
Okay. Well, I guess what gives me the vibe is kind of when I listen to something, and okay, then he's asking saturation. Okay, so let's start with the vibe. For me, everything I do is, sound-wise is also visual. I visualize what I'm hearing. I'm trying to remember what it reminds me of, either a show, an album I heard, a feeling, an environment, something I grew up with, musically. So I go by what it makes me feel, and then how do I increase that vibe? How do I make it feel convincing to me even more? So it's like, this reminds me of something, but it misses this, this, and this to make it feel like it is this. So that's one of the first thing I do when I listen to things. It's a quick process, and then just to find where it is, but then going deeper is a longer process, because finding where it is going down memory lane or trying to feel what it reminds me of, and but the actual process can take longer. In terms of saturation, I can't say that saturation is a go-to thing for me all the time. In a lot of cases, I don't even saturate. There are projects which I saturated, but it's not like a go-to for me that, oh, I got to put a saturator on it. No, I think, if the saturation is needed, we'll go for it. If it's not needed, the vibe can come out without doing it. It's like clipping. You don't have to clip. You can make things loud without clipping. Of course, you'll have the risk of compression or limiting or ducking certain elements of the mix, but it doesn't have to be one way. And a lot of my masters are not clipped. Actually, a big amount of them are not clipped, but some are. They're clipped not in a distortion way, like in a bad way, but clipped in terms of having a sound, a more edgy sound, if needed. A lot of the stuff I've done in the past and still do is not even clipped at all. So, David, did that answer your question, or I'm missing for you?
Yes, it did. He says, yes, it did. He says, excuse me if it was asked before. You can ignore the question if it was asked, but how do you approach compression limiting in mastering?
For me, compression is a type of coloration because it doesn't take the mix from one place and translates it exactly to the other. There's something happening in the compressor. On the dynamic side, of course, the levels, but also it colors it based on the actual piece of gear. Each compressor sounds different, even when you're not compressing, or when you're compressing lightly. So I look at compressors as tools to color and manipulate the sound. Some compressors, when they compress, they just sound great. Some compressors, when they compress, I less like the compression. I like the sound in overall, but less the compression. So if it fits, I'll add it. If it doesn't fit, I'll go for a different compressor. So my approach is that in some cases you want to hear it. In some cases you barely want to hear it, or not at all. And it's really program dependent. If you're doing a material that the compression balances it more, then go for it, because sometimes mixes have peaks and valleys dynamically in a way that is less nice on the ear, like a vocal popping too much loud in certain areas, and compressing it will actually glue it in a nice way. Sometimes the drums are mixed a bit louder for a reason, because they're going to get compressed, and it's common. Sometimes you'll get mixes like that the kick and snare are louder, so compression can pull it back. Sometimes compression can actually do the opposite and make it feel like there's more movement. Some compressors have the ability to just, making that pumping feel, not in a bad way, but actually in a good way. They make you feel like something's going up and down, bouncing with the song, not overdone, just a bit. So my approach to mastering and mastering with compressors and limiters is basically, does it help fix the problem, or does it create a problem? If it creates a problem, there's no use to do it. And if it helps, yeah. We have to remember, everything we do in audio, we're changing. We're manipulating the sound. Either we like it or not. It's like we're degrading it in a way that we might like it, or we're degrading it in a way we don't like. So, it's never the original anymore. So if it helps, use it. I know it's very general and it sounds very universal to say it, but I think that there's no, you can't quantify it. It's really finding where that spot that compressor is helping you. Now, you have to remember that the song has different sections, and sometimes what works good for the verse doesn't work good for the chorus. Now you can cut and paste and do different settings, which I prefer not to. So I would say try to find a setting that works good for the verse and works good for the chorus. Maybe better for the chorus or maybe better for the verse, but you have to be aware that there's going to be changes there. And sometimes even really good mixers, it happens that they overlook something and it worked great on the verse, and when it came to the chorus it clamped it. The stereo field collapsed, and then also the high end collapses, goes, kind of gets muffled. So you have to find a sweet spot where it works best for you. Did that answer it? Okay.
And the answer, David, says, and David is asking which compressors do that moving thing.
Okay. Compressors that do that moving thing usually are very fast compressors. One example is probably like an SSL compressor can do that. It's not that it's based in a way that they made it to do that. It's just kind of the result of what it does. That's why if you set it in the right place, you will have that punch, that smack that, it grabs but it releases, grabs and releases in a nice way. SSL compressors do that. Focusrite Red does that. Amex do that too. There's a lot of compressors that can do that. I wouldn't go for an opto compressor to do that, but because they're they tend to be more creamy, and but compressors that can react really fast can do that. Some plugins can do that too because they're very fast. So you really have to listen to, because like in some compressors they do that, but their sound might be too mushy, and some might have very hard mids, edgy mids. So even with an SSL compressor or an Allen Smart, there's a C1, there's a C2. They both react different because of the way the side chain works and the way they're linked. So you got to really test and see what works on your material. Some stuff doesn't work that good on, like, some bass-heavy things won't work on certain compressors as much as others. The Focusrite is actually a good compressor to get that nice punch with it. It's different than the SSL, has a different sound, but you can achieve it with both compressors. They'll just sound a bit different. A bit or a bit more, even. Depends on the setting. And also you have to remember there's also a makeup gain that you gotta set in a way that you don't feel the loss as much. So when you're comparing it, make sure your makeup gain is set exactly to bypass the same level, so you can see if your attack and release are set right and getting the groove out. Because the minute you put it louder, it might, it's very elusive. Once you put it louder, you can feel that it's doing something. It's basically, it's maybe doing the opposite, but you're leveling it up, and there's the wow factor of the level. Did that answer?
Says, I've already asked quite a few questions speaking about plugins. Do you work with mastering plugins like Ozone or Slate? And do you find any use for them? Do you use the mastering plugins, like stuff for Slate, from Slate Digital, Ozone?
I have, besides my workflow on the mastering desk, which is a combination of analog gear that has tube, solid state, transformer-based, passive, different types of analog circuitries. I also have digital hardware, real digital hardware, like EQs and compressors and limiters, and they work as hardware themselves, so they get a signal and being processed. I also have plugins for certain fixes in certain sequences and or adding certain sounds. I use them. They're very good. As I mentioned before when we asked about Ozone, and now you're also asking about Slate, those are very good plugins, and they can be used to get really good results. So if you have them, use them. They're good. They sound good. Like just know them really well, because a plugin has parameters, and those can make a big difference. If it was one knob, then you would probably have to learn each increment of that knob. But when you have a few knobs and more, then there's a big learning curve to learn which does what. But after a while, you kind of learn what you like and work with it. So I would say, yeah, use them. I mean, I've used them. I like them. I learned in time to work with some of them more and some of them less, and it depends on the workflow. Sometimes I would like to use a certain plug just because it's easy to work with, and sometimes I would like a different plug because of its sound. So it's a combination of different approaches. Plus, I have the desk that I work with. That's where that's how the masters are made with it. I bring the attitude and vibe with the desk, and then continue, inside the computer with what's needed.
All right, I'm going to probably murder some of these names, people, and I apologize in advance. There's a fella named, it looks like Googleetu, and he's asking, he says the problem that he has is finding, I'll just read it. The problem I have with mastering is finding the mud in the mid-range. What's the easy way to find the mud in a mix?
Okay, so you're asking that question as a mastering engineer, like as you mastering the project?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, mud is probably, we call it mud. We can also just call it low mids that are not good sounding to the project. It's a very sensitive area, because you take too much of it, you lose the energy. You take too less of it, it doesn't help get clarity. Sometimes I found that I gotta leave it as is, otherwise it's just ruining the project. Even half a dB or 1 dB, it just takes the vibe out. You gotta be conscious that if that area has a lot of things in it, taking it out might ruin it. Some people like to do notches, which can work really well. Some people don't like notches because they like the more vibrant feel there. So it's very common that that area is going to be a lot of work. I think in time I learned that that area is very sensitive, and the more I worked on different projects, I learned that even if there's something that appears in 10 of them the same, it doesn't mean that you have to approach those 10 the same. And even if you do, they're going to sound different, because in some places, 200 hertz, 400 hertz, 300 hertz, 700 hertz, whatever, they're just going to affect the other instruments as well. So, taking that off, it might work, but it also might change. The good thing is that our ears connect more to clarity than to mud. We like clarity. So sometimes cleaning that area up is more appealing to the ear. So it's maybe it's a necessity in some cases, and maybe that's one of the first things that you'll approach. Be like, oh, I gotta cut that I don't know, 250, or 300 or 400, or it's like or 180 on the upper bass. Sometimes it's just an immediate thing, that people do. The frequencies I mentioned, they don't have to be that. It could be 251. It could be 275. But it's very natural that you'll approach that area to clean the mud. But I would suggest before you go clean that mud, listen to it, maybe in a few speakers, because if you have, because sometimes in a home environment, certain speakers, they couple with the desk and the stands, and then that is exaggerated even more, and you might assume that there's more mud than there is. So maybe check on headphones, and then you might find that there's not as much mud or low mid frequencies as there are there, so it's a good idea to check. But if your system is really good and you have a good room and the speakers are set good and you can hear that area a lot, that like really clear, and understand that that's the problem, then just go out there and and approach it and just fix it what you can with it. But still be aware that there might be other instruments they're setting, and sometimes the artist wants that. Sometimes there's a mid-range that you don't like, but if you take it out, it's going to take the articulation off of a certain instrument. So it's very common to approach that area for sure. But just reference maybe in headphones as well, just to make sure it's not the room or the coupling of the speakers with the desk that pushes those frequencies. Did that answer it?
Well, we'll just have to assume yes. Question for you, Maor. Your surgical EQ. What are you using for surgical EQ?
I'm using a Weiss EQ1 MK2. It's this piece here. It's a hardware EQ, and I use it for really small surgical things.
Okay.
But you can use a plug-in, and sometimes during sequencing, between songs, I might have to put a plug-in to adjust another frequency. So usually while doing the mastering, like the capture of the audio, I'll use that as a surgical EQ, and then later on when I'm sequencing, if I need to make adjustments, I'll use inside the program. But this is almost always in use when I need surgical EQing, because it can go really deep. So that's what I use for surgical.
And do you use multiband compression at all?
In some projects, yeah. Not everything I use multibands. Multiband compressors are very complex processors. They have so much ability to alter the mix, and they have so much ability to fix or damage. So you want to make sure it really fits. You have some that have 4 bands, 5 bands, 3 bands. There used to be some with 2 bands. Those were the first ones that were multiband. I use a multiband compressor on some projects. It's cool.
What's the deciding factor that makes you actually choose a multiband?
I think it has to do with how it sounds when I apply it, and if it's really needed. I think that there's a lot of projects that really need multiband compressors, but in some cases where the mix sits really good and I don't think it needs, then I won't put it. In the past I used more on certain projects that really needed, because it really depends on what comes in, and sometimes a multiband, as much as it can help, it can also alter the mix and change it in a way that the person might not like it. So I think the deciding factor is it's a trial and error thing, but at the same time you got to listen and see if it fits the aesthetics. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's, you can do something that you like but the client doesn't like, and if he doesn't like and he says, could you change it, I'll change it. In my method of working, I include revisions because I'm aware that my taste might not be what they want. So if they want to change, that's okay. Just tell me and I'll change. I'm not going to say, oh, it's going to cost you this and this and this, and it's going to, I like to have a dialogue with my clients, and I think that when you have a dialogue, you can get a good result. So that's how I work. So, let's say I might do a project with a multiband, and it might alter the mix in a way the client doesn't like, and he'll say that, and then I'll be like, okay, let's turn off that multiband, and try from scratch, try it new. If you think of it, the need for a multiband is usually to either alter the overall sound of the mix, and change low end and high ends, ranges, not just the frequency. A multiband touches ranges. So, if I put a multiband, it's going to change the range of the low end and the range of the high end and the mid range.
Okay, and he says, he real quick, he said yes, that did answer his question about the low mud. He just sent a message saying yes. One of the guys, let's see, Mark Alfaro, hope I said his name right, says, in terms of the most basic equipment, Maor, what would you recommend to the most tight budget person for the EQ, converters, and monitors?
Okay, if you have a tight budget, I would say invest in plugins, because with hardware, everything is connected to each other. One thing affects the other, like big time. Like, for example, when you're working with hardware, the cables take an effect. They affect the sound. The power that runs it, how clean it is, how regulated it is, how free of noise it is. The proximity between different pieces of gear. The clocking. The actual piece of gear as well. So I would say, if you're starting out, you don't have money to invest in actual hardware, I would say go to plugins. You'll have much more possibilities because you can switch between plugins in real time. You don't have to have a switcher. You don't have to have an analog router or a digital router or both. You don't have to, you're not stuck with one thing. If you have, I don't know, $1,000 to invest, if you put it on a piece of gear, you're going to buy maybe one. But if you put it on plugins, you're going to have, you'll have quite a few of them to play with. Monitoring is important. Buy the monitor you can afford, and know that there's limitations with it. Also, the room is a big factor. So, if you have a great speaker in a bad room, you're not going to benefit too much of the speaker as much as if you had a good room. So, be aware of that. So a lower priced speaker, might sound less good than a higher priced speaker, but your room still is not doing the best to it. So I would say, maybe get a good set of headphones, really good one. It's a good investment. And you can work it all day. Get a good bundle of plugins if you can. Just be aware, it's not going to be like it's done in a mastering studio. Well, at least it's not going to be done like if it was well mastered in a mastering studio. And that being said, if it's done good in a mastering studio, it could be done bad as well in a good mastering studio. So you might not get the clarity or vibe that is possible in a big facility, in a professional facility, but you might still get satisfactory results. There's a few people I know that mix and master. It could sound way better than what they're doing, but it sounds good enough. The reason it sounds better is because it can get a better perspective by somebody fresh that hasn't worked on it before, and hears it new, for the first time, and can bring something added to the project, a new perspective, a new spice. But if they mixed and mastered it, they can still get a fine result, a good sounding result. So I'd say, put the money in the right things. Find the plugs that you really like and you want to work with them, and invest in them. If you want to go hardware, then you've got to do a lot of research. Find the box that really fits you. Not everything that you hear or know that is out there is going to do the job for you. Some of them are great sounding boxes, but for certain types of recordings or certain types of setups. A mastering rig is a setup, and it's different than what everybody else has. Everybody has his own setup, just like you have the way you like your table being set and your speakers are set, and just like the food you like eating or drinks you like drinking. It's a personal preference. It might be something that a lot of people like, but everybody puts it in a different way. So if you go the route of hardware, you will have to do a lot of testing to find out what you like that could fit your budget, and be all across the board as much as you can with the music you're working on.
Okay. I'll read off this question to you. Let's see, it's from Toasters Legrand. Says, hey Maor, do you compare your projects to any example tracks CDs to achieve a certain sound? If yes, do you have a favorite track or CD that you do this with?
Most of the time I don't do that. Every project is unique. People work hard to achieve their own sound, their own music, their own vibe. So I think, comparing them might not be the right thing, especially if they didn't produce it the same or mix it the same. There are times where I've been asked to compare levels. Sometimes you can get the levels, sometimes you can't, because it was arranged differently and recorded and mixed differently, so getting those same levels will maybe not work right, or compress more or limit more, and it doesn't work the same. Sometimes I can achieve those levels, so it's usually more to achieve that level. I've had times where it was achieving a certain sound, like a low end or high end, but it's not an everyday thing. Usually they want me to do what I do, and if they want changes, I do the changes. If they think they want a certain sound or level or certain brightness or low end, which either I brought and they're happy, and if I didn't bring, they'll tell me and I make the changes to accommodate their needs. So I can't recommend a certain CD, because a certain album is a certain album. It doesn't mean you will have that same sound. Even if you copy it and you get close to it, it's still its own thing. So I won't say it's a necessity to do so. But if somebody sends me a reference track and they want me to get close to it, I'll try. I can't promise I'll get there, unless it's exactly the same. But at least I'll give the effort and listen to it and try.
Okay, and how would somebody who has gotten pretty good at mastering, what would you suggest that they do to go about getting clients?
Well, if they got good at mastering, they probably got good clients already. If you're really good at something and you work hard to get better, you're probably experimenting a lot, and you're probably already, got a few clients here and there. What makes an engineer good in his profession? It's not just his work by him knowing where to place the mics or how to cut the EQ, or in mixing how to blend, or mastering how to apply compression and EQ. A lot of it has to do with getting your clients, because if you're good at something and you do it for quite a while, your name gets bigger. So if you feel very accomplished in what you're doing, then I would say, first of all, continue doing it, because you're you're improving all the time, and you're getting to the point where you reevaluate what you're doing and improving, and probably more people know of that since you're working with them. So maybe advertising would be the right thing for you. There's different ways of advertising, in printed matter and online, and meeting people and communicating. I think, like with everything, it's part of career development. There's people who can help you because they can represent you. There's people who can help you because they will give you opportunities to advertise, and of course, some of it costs money, some of it is free. I think that the longer you do it, the more people are exposed to your work, and that brings work in. And even if you approach people, the longer you do it, the easier it is to get the gig, because they already know your track record, or they can check your track record. So when I say easier, it doesn't mean it's easy, like, it's not easy. It's just that it's instead of trying to convince them based on what you say, you can convince them based on what you've done, and say, this is what I've done, you can check, as opposed to you don't have it and you're trying to convince them to give you a shot. In the end of the day, it's their decision, and some people will give you a shot and some don't, and you might do an album that has some exposure, and then the friends of those bands that you worked with, they'll throw business towards your way too. So it's gaining clientele, really. Like with every business, if you have a mastering studio, or if you have a clothing line, or if you have a plumbing company, or you make food, it's you try to build clientele, and it's being a good businessman too. We're in the music business, so we got to approach it not just we know how to EQ, but we got to know how to bring the client in too, and work with the client. That's very important. Every day you learn something else, because every day you got a different phone call or email from a client, and you got to figure out how to work with him. So you might be good at what you're doing, but to get the clients, it means bringing that talent and goodness that you are in a form of how it applies to other people you work with, unless you have an agent that does all that work for you, which is a possibility as well. Did that answer the question?
Yes. Now, Stedman, is your mic working? He keeps coming and then disappearing. I was wanting to make sure I get him in. David Stedman, Studio Monster. Okay, he's silent. Got another question for you over here that someone typed up. Let's see. All right. This is from Zach Felder. It says, thank you so much for putting these together. Would love to join and soak up some info. This is a question for the Hangout. Is there one piece of advice that you would give your mix engineer that could be said for any session, whether it be regarding compression, levels, EQ, etc., to help ensure a smooth transition to the mastering stage? Thank you for your time, Maor. Looking forward to the Hangout.
I think the best advice is be open to, one would be criticism, feedback, which is criticism, but it's either way how you want to call it. Second thing is be open to the idea there might be changes needed. So, when I say that, it's like make sure your sessions are saved and backed up, and that you are able to go back and make fixes, unless it's with tons of hardware and it's already set. And in that case, maybe it's a good idea to have stems just in case you need to build a new mix. Let's say your low end is too much because of the bass guitar. So if you have a stem of the, if you have stems that you printed, you can remix just those stems and lower the bass guitar. So kind of be open to possibilities of changes. A second thing is, there's no rules in terms of how to compress and how to EQ. There's only, guidelines or ideas. But, and there's people who say it has to be more than this, you already have to go that way. They might be right, in their way of working, or maybe it can apply to others. But just in general, EQs, they're a good tool to work with, and they're very important to get the results we want. But we have to remember that placing an EQ on an instrument and placing an EQ on a whole mix is totally two different approaches. Okay? If you have a problem with a certain low end in the mix, if you fix it on the EQ on the mix bus, it might do more harm than just going to the bass guitar and just fixing it there. So a quick fix on the mix bus can actually do more damage than than maybe a longer fix in the actual instrument. And that's why when you have processors on the mix bus, they're more sensitive because they can do more damage than just on a channel itself. You have to remember what's on the mix bus affects everything as a whole. And it affects how the transients go, it affects how dynamic it is in terms of how loud and how low certain areas are, and also the mid-range and the phases between the frequencies and the if you have stereo expansion on the mix bus, it's going to change a lot as well. So I would say try to fix things actually in the source. I mean, if you can in the recording, of course, that's the best. But if it's only in the mix, go to the actual instruments and tweak it there. If you need to cut high end, don't cut it from the mix, cut it from the cymbals. That way the mix is not going to be dull. It's just going to be the cymbals fixed. So that's kind of where I would say approach the EQing. Fix it where the problem is at the source of it and not as a cover. I work on the overall. I work on the cover because that's what I do only. So if you can let me do it, but it's not going to be the same as if you tweak the mix in a way that you fix it there. If I have a mix with too much highs on the cymbals and the vocals are dull, it's going to be hard for me to open the vocals because the cymbals are too hyped and harsh. So I have to dull the mix. If the mix has SE vocals, like too bright vocals, and the cymbals are dull, I can't brighten up the cymbals without it doing something to the vocals. So I have to approach the vocals and kind of find where I can fix that and open that. Where it's an easy fix in the mix, just take the high end of the cymbals a bit lower and maybe lower them down in the mix. Same thing with the vocals, maybe de-ess it as much as you can. So that's my approach to anything that could be fixed in a mix prior to mastering. Let's say this: problems you can fix in the mix, and fix them in the sources, or at least if you want to call it source or tracks, or those channels. The least you can do to fix it on the master bus is better, if actually fixing it in the master bus. Did that answer the question?
Yes. Now, Chris Stone, yes. Chris Stone has a question. He says, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had a client who liked your mastering, but the client's record label wanted to do their own mastering? If yes, what was that like, and what did you do?
Well, you have to remember that there's so many deciding factors. Like, a client could be happy with your work and love it, and it's the best thing I've ever done, and do an album with you, and then the next album with somebody else, not because he didn't like your work, it's because the record label made a different decision, or A&R, or management, or producer, change mixer. Same thing applies also to the situation you asked. There's so many variables. When you work with people, they can change the equation. If you like what the mastering engineer did, but the record label wants someone else, then it's a debate between you and them, and who calls the shot. Shots. If they say we decide and they want to go with their guy, what can you do? If it sounds better, great, you benefit. If it sounds worse, you lost. What can you do? And those things happen on a day-to-day basis with producers, engineers, mixers, and mastering engineers. I've seen it happen so many times where the decisions that were made were so bad. It's like you'd be surprised how come they don't figure that thing out before, or why they don't think for the benefit of the actual listener. Or sometimes, it could go both ways. It could go like, no, we want that guy, and that guy does a great job. And sometimes they choose the wrong thing. You never know what's the reason, and you never know the results unless they happen. Until they happen. I've had that happen in the past. Yes, I've done albums where they changed mixing engineers during the project. Or producers, and I had projects that came to me after they were mastered somewhere else, or there were projects that went to other people after I've mastered it. The labels made their own decisions. Sometimes for the good and bad. And it's also a taste thing. Sometimes a band likes a certain taste, but the record label, they want to package it differently. They want to sell it to a different crowd, or they expect a certain thing to get from the artist, and they want to kind of put it in that square. Let's say you mastered it really, really aggressive, and they want it really soft, or you did it very soft, and they want it super edgy to compete with a different act that is kind of like you. So those things can happen, and they do, and sometimes. There's songs that a certain mastering engineer does, and then in the album it's a different mastering engineer. So, or the opposite. Sometimes it's the album was done by one guy, and then there's a few B-sides that come out, or a new single that wasn't there, especially for a certain campaign. It's a different guy. You really can't deal with that situation besides, living with it and saying, what can you do? In the end, the only fight you can fight is trying to convince them by showing that you're doing the best work you can. But the deciding factors, they're out of your hand. If you do a good job, if you do a bad job, then, what can you do? But let's think of you doing a good job to it, for it. If they want someone else, if they're willing to spend the money, or maybe they get a freebie, I don't know. But it's one of those things you got to live with. Sometimes it's sad, but and you can't say don't take it personally, because in the end it is personally, because you're the person involved with it. So they'll tell you don't take it personally. Yeah, but yeah, it's normal that you will take it personally because you're the person. But you just have to live with it. And it's one of those stories later on you can say, oh, I've had these experiences in my life, or I've seen that part of the music industry, which is cool in the end, because if you didn't have those stories, what would you have to share, in that field, That's the thing, is like you sit and talk with your friends, oh yeah, they just took my master and did this and that, it's good to have those experiences, because at least you can, relate to what other people are also having to deal with, and it could be a nice thing, a nice conversation too. Did that answer the question?
Yes, and time that you spend educating clients. I was just reading some of the remarks. And Pensado students about mastering, and one of the guys was talking about he spends time educating his clients, because then it makes for a better mix, makes for a better overall, experience, for you. How much time do you actually, how much time do you actually spend educating people when they need it?
Well, if they need, we talk how much they need. if I know that they can improve the mix, I'll give them a call or email them or chat with them and tell them what I think is needed. And if they can improve it, great. If they can't, we'll work with what there is there. If it's a mix that was done a long time ago and they can't access the files, we'll work with what's there. If they have the possibility to go and fix, we'll do. I'll tell them what I feel is needed, and they can try that out and see if it works. And if it works, great, and they send me a new version and I can work with it. If there's still issues, I'll tell them. In some cases, there's a limit to what I can say because they're on a time crunch, and and I can say, look, this is what we can achieve at that certain amount of time, so fix this and this, and and then we have a close deadline, so we'll work with the new improvement, but there's still things we could have done if we had more time. So usually I invest the time to walk with my clients, walk within the project, and you can say walk or talk or discuss the project, how to make it better. It could be one time that is needed, it could be 4 times. It's, in the end of the day, I do want it to sound the best possible. Whatever we can do to improve it on either mixing side or mastering side. And even recording, sometimes there's a problem in the recording, and it's better to retrack that part just to make it sound better instead of trying to fix the problem and then we're still with the problem. But it's all about what's possible. If it's possible to go and redo it or re-edit it and fix it, great. If not, we move ahead to what's possible to do. If it's in the mix, we work it. I've had projects that took a while to get fixed, and it's because we wanted to get it sounding best as possible. Sometimes we, reconnected with a mixing engineer. Sometimes it's a band that just did it by themselves and didn't have enough experience, and then we connected with a mixing guy and it helped them, and we kind of made the equation work. So, yeah, it's possible to give that guidance and, some can call it mentoring, some guidance, some education, but I usually spend quite a lot with my clients if needed. Yeah, why not? We all benefit from it. Better sounding album, better sounding single or EP or project, whatever you want to call it.
How early do you get involved? As in, say I'm starting out a project and I do a bounce down mix. Do some people, what's the earliest you'll get involved? Do people send you stuff immediately, sometimes like at the beginning of their projects, so that you can give guidance?
Really depends on the projects, and they're willing to do so. I've done a lot of projects where we would start by them sending me a song to evaluate. I give them feedback, then they start working. They fix that, send me back. I say, okay, that's nice. Let's work on, and they work on it, and they continue, and then if the songs come back and one of them has a problem, we just address that one. But I've worked on projects where I was involved really in the beginning of the mixing stage, like the first mix, and I've worked on stuff that just handed to me. So it's really dependent on how the client wants to work, and how complex is the project, and how the communication can be established. If it's something they want to start early on, or just after they have most of the mixes and then just tweak certain things. I think it's personal preference. I don't mind going from beginning or in the middle or in the end. It's basically what they want and how much involvement they want in that stage. Some people want to get at least the whole album done and then just do tweaks. Some people want from beginning. So I'm cool with both ways.
Okay, David Stedman has a question for you. He had to type it out. He says, what is the last thing on your chain? Is it limiter, clipper, whatever, and how far do you push it?
It really depends. Sometimes if I don't need to clip, then a limiter would be the last one. If I do need to clip it to get edginess in it, then I'll put a clipper. I don't have one way of working in terms of this would be always the setup to get that, to achieve all the results. Limiters usually are there, to make sure we're not, putting too much and clipping in a bad way. The clippers are there to achieve that certain sound and level. So there's no one.
Hold on, Maor. Constantine has muted you. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go. Okay, go ahead.
So I don't have one way to work. I have a lot of ways to work, and I think it's just about finding what fits the project. In general, you know, to get level, you can go with limiters, you can go with clippers. Each one has its you know, pros and cons. Limiters have a certain sound, but they can also glue things too much. Clippers have a certain sound, but they might sometimes be too edgy on certain things or flatten things in a way. So I would try and see if it fits the sound, and of course, you know, I'm always relying on, you know, if the client likes it or not. You know, in the end of the day, it's his product, it's his art that is being presented to the world. I have a part in that, but that my part is, it's important and there's a lot of responsibility and it's shaping it, but it's his art that he has to live with because it's his release, you know, it's his creation. So, you know, who makes the final call, you know, or final decisions is him. I can only help them. We gotta wrap this up. I'm sorry, but
all right. Can we get about 3 more questions, real quick, if you can answer them quick?
Okay, shoot.
All right. First one: do you ever automate compression or ride levels?
I try to find sweet spots where they sound really good overall. In some cases, I do have to automate. If there's certain things jumping up and down and it's hard to find the sweet spot, then yes, I would automate levels or driving, you know, or I call it driving, but the way the signal is pushed to the compressor or EQ, or actually a compressor or an additional EQ if needed to be automated. So not every time. I'll first of all try to find the sweet spot, and if not, then I do automation.
Okay, second question from Matthews Z. He's asking, okay, can someone ask about the mindset and approach to making the track sing with EQ adjustments? Also, the approach to transient shaping on the mastering bus, as well as dynamic range and important things to keep in mind when approaching the topic when approaching this topic in the mastering stage.
Well, I think the question applies in general to different approaches in music and aesthetics. I think one answer would be that there's no one answer to it. I think it's a lot about feeling the vibe of the music and feeling what you're doing to it, if it helps it or not. If you feel that it makes the song convince you more, then you're doing right to it. If you feel that it's taking it off and it's not convincing to you, then maybe you need to play with it a bit more till it excites you more. And not just excites because it has more highs or more lows, but the overall feeling, if you feel that really it penetrates. So I think to answer that question is, there's so many parameters that are involved, it's hard to pinpoint what will work with what, and you really got to try different things and go by you know, feeling and what you're conscious to and what might be, you know, going to your subconscious. It's probably a game, and sometimes it might take a few tries to find the right one.
And Maor, when I was listening, I spent a lot of time listening to Michael Jackson's albums like Bad, right? And so I'm in my vehicle, and when I play my mix is the harsh frequencies were attacking me. On Michael Jackson's album, they were lower frequencies thumping me, and it felt good. Mine did not feel good. Mine were killing me. His were hitting me and feeling good. It was more of a body. It was a lower frequency. Do you, just speak on transients as far as different frequencies, what you pay attention to, or what you do, or any issues or whatever?
First of all, you have to understand a lot of things are made in the recording. To get certain results, you have to start with certain sources. Okay. Today there's more people mixing than recording, like back in the day. Okay, because most people work at home or work on laptops, and so they don't record as they did back in the day in studios with acoustics and different types of microphones and preamps and all the arsenal of gear and experience that there was there. So a lot of what you're feeling is based on what's in the recording. The Michael Jackson, that's a lot of great talented people with great gear and minds and the ability to create what you're hearing. And that's why it's apples to oranges. You can't really compare one thing to the other. You can just try to make your tracks sounding pleasing more. So with transients and EQs, it's really trying to get to that point where it pleases you in a way that you're not just convinced because you did it, but it works on others as well. It works in a way that it makes you groove. It makes you feel nice with it if it's a groovy tune. If it's a mellow tune, you want to make sure it pleases you. It makes you get into that mood. So it's hard to compare the two because they're different things. But at the same time, the approach is what is needed to the track. Does it need to be thumping? Does it need to be grooving? Or does it need to be pleasantly, nice or mellow? Did that answer?
Bruh, that you went straight to it. You went straight to the heart of it. The beginning stages, the recording, even how people perform it. Get it right at the beginning so that you don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. And then of course there's more places for the mixer to do his stuff and do the mastering to do their stuff. I prefer enhancing a project than fixing a problem. In a lot of cases I fix and enhance, okay, or fix a lot and enhance, but I would prefer just enhancing. In some cases that's what I just do, so that's their ideal. Okay.
And yes, the last one is Damon Martin wanting to know, how do you mix a sound to be edgy in the mastering process? And are you referring to enhancing the emotion of the music? Because you had said edgy earlier.
Well, everything you do affects the emotion on a conscious and subconscious level. If you make things sound edgy or more harsh, that will make the song feel more aggressive. If you want it to be more pleasant and soft, then you don't have those edges. And emotionally, it will seem softer. Ballads are usually really nice sounding. They might have high end, but their mid ranges are not aggressive. And their low end are smooth. If you want to take something and make it a bit more tight and aggressive, it's going to be maybe still sounding nice, but it's going to feel more penetrating. And that way, it would be more pushing, and maybe you'll feel the groove more instead of feeling the emotional vibe. Just like you have a ballad and you have a dance song and you have a rock song. Sound and music are very much alike. You push one way, it makes it feel one way. If you take a ballad and make it very aggressive and edgy, it's not going to be pleasing as a ballad that is smooth. So automatically, people will respond to it differently. If you take a groovy song and instead of making it tight, make it too sloppy, it's not going to be too groovy. It's going to be maybe in between. So it's going to be less dancey. It's more going to be something in the middle of, like, you have a groove and you feel it, but it's not tighter. Okay? Did that answer?
Absolutely, bro. Is there? We're about to head out. Is there anything that you have not worked on that you want to work on?
Oh, I want to work on everything.
It's money, huh?
I love a lot of music, so whatever comes my way, I'll be happy to work. I love music, so there's a lot of things I would love.
I just friend when we were at SAE just recently. The rapper, I'm forgetting his name right now. He's an MC. You introduced me to him. You've done work for him.
Oh, Ray Speakmore, yeah.
Speedmore, yeah, Ray Speedmore. I just friended him on Facebook, adding him to Pensado students, so we'll see him around. Cool dude, bruh. He's a cool dude.
Ray Speedmore, yeah.
Is there anything you want to say, Mayor, before we head out?
Great having you all here. Hope we do another one soon. I have some topics, new topics that I would like to share with you guys. So I'll get kind of an idea for the next one, and we'll talk, and we'll make a next one soon. Okay, guys? Have fun.
With all these questions, we never did get to the topics of mastering process in relation with the clients.
Right.
Yes, we did, kind of. And then communication factor, we touched on that a little bit. Technical and non-technical discussion. I never did fully get to those, but we touched on them good enough. So
what I think of this, here's my suggestion. Let's do that the next one. But let's get questions prior. Let's get all the people who are involved to start writing questions and send them all to Mott and Bill. And that way next time we'll have a list of questions and Mott will start reading those questions, and then we can actually work with all those questions up front. Okay?
All right, as a matter of fact, would you like a list sent to you so you can look them over and just be ready to just rattle stuff off?
No, I'm fine with you reading to me them up front spontaneously. I'm cool with that.
All right.
Okay, we'll do one soon.
Thank you very much, bruh. And you have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Dope.